Some of the fastest cars Detroit ever built were also the hardest to sell. They were purpose-built racing machines that happened to carry license plates, constructed only because the sanctioning bodies required a manufacturer to sell a certain number to the public before the car could compete on a track. So the factories built them, shipped them to showrooms across the country, and watched their dealers try to explain to a walk-in customer why this particular Chevrolet cost twice as much as the one parked right next to it and came with no heater. Some sat on dealer lots for months. Others were stripped of their aerodynamic parts and sold at a loss. A few were quietly returned to the factory. These are 9 race-only muscle cars dealers could never sell to the public. Number 9. The 1970 Plymouth Superbird. The Superbird's nose cone and rear wing made it look like nothing else in any showroom in America. Plymouth built the car for one reason: to bring Richard Petty back. Petty had left Plymouth for Ford after the 1968 season because Plymouth did not have a competitive aerodynamic package for NASCAR's superspeedways. Dodge had the Charger Daytona. Plymouth had nothing. So Plymouth took the Roadrunner platform, extended the nose by roughly 18 inches with a molded fiberglass cone, and bolted a rear wing to the trunk lid that stood over 2 feet tall on steel struts. The wing height was not entirely about aerodynamics. It was sized, so the trunk lid could still open underneath it. NASCAR's homologation rules required Plymouth to produce one Superbird for every 2 dealerships in the country, which meant roughly 1,920 units had to be built and distributed through the dealer network, whether anyone wanted them or not. The plan worked on the track. Petty came back to Plymouth, and the Superbird became competitive on the superspeedways immediately. On the dealer lots, the car was a disaster. Customers did not want to park something that looked like it belonged at Talladega Superspeedway in their suburban driveways. The nose cone stuck out so far it would not fit in some service bays. The wings scraped the ceiling of residential garages. Dealers pulled the wings off. They repainted the nose cone's body color to make the car look less outrageous. Some offered steep discounts, hundreds and then thousands of dollars off the sticker, just to move inventory. A dealer in the rural Midwest reportedly parked one behind his building and left it sitting there for over a year before he found a buyer willing to take it. The irony is permanent. Today, a numbers-matching Superbird in a desirable color combination brings well over 6 figures at auction, and the cars with their original wings and nose cones intact are worth the most. The parts dealers tore off in 1970 to make the car sellable are the exact parts that make it priceless now. Number 8. The 1965 Plymouth Belvedere. A 990 race Hemi was Plymouth's answer to the drag racing arms race, and it arrived with all the subtlety of a brick through a plate glass window. The A990 started as a production Belvedere, then received the 426 cubic inch race Hemi, the same engine that had dominated the 1964 Daytona 500 so thoroughly that NASCAR rewrote its rulebook in response. Plymouth's engineers stripped the car to its structural minimum. The steel hood and fenders gave way to thinner replacements. Sound deadening was removed entirely. The heater was deleted. The seats were swapped for thin, flat units that offered about as much comfort as a park bench. Side glass was thinner than production spec. Anything that did not help the race Hemi launch harder from a standing start was either pulled or replaced with something lighter. Chrysler built roughly 100 A990s and shipped them through the dealer network to pre-arranged buyers, most of them established drag racers who already had a trailer parked at the dealership. The car was not something you could commute in. The race Hemi ran a radical camshaft that produced an uneven, barely functional idle. It required high-octane fuel that no standard gas station carried. The stripped interior turned every highway mile into a punishment of road noise and vibration. A customer who wandered into a Plymouth showroom and found an A990 on the floor would have been baffled by a car that looked like a family sedan on the outside and felt like a cage on the inside. The ones that were not immediately claimed by racers sat on dealer lots until they were discounted just to clear the floor space. On the strip, the A990 did exactly what Chrysler designed it to do. It dominated the superstock classes and proved the Hemi program could win at every level of organized competition. Number 7. The 1964 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt. Ford wanted to dominate the National Hot Rod Association's superstock class in 1964, and the midsize Fairlane was the chosen platform. The company handed the conversion project to Dearborn Steel Tubing, an outside specialty contractor in Dearborn, Michigan, that had worked with Ford on performance builds before. They took a standard two-door Fairlane sedan, pulled out the small block engine, and dropped in a 427 cubic inch high-riser V8 with dual 4-barrel Holley carburetors sitting on a high-rise aluminum intake manifold. The stock transmission was replaced with a heavy-duty Lincoln automatic that could survive the torque without destroying itself on the launch. The front suspension was modified with relocated spring towers to transfer weight to the rear tires during a hard start. Fiberglass replaced the stock hood, front fenders, and front bumper. The side windows were plexiglass. There was no back seat, no heater, no radio, and no sound deadening of any kind. The interior was stripped to the bare essentials. Ford built approximately 100 Thunderbolts and shipped them through its dealer network, but not one of them was ever intended for a walk-in customer. Each car was pre-allocated to a known competitive drag racer or a Ford dealer with an established factory-backed racing program. The Thunderbolt could run mid-11-second quarter miles right off the transport trailer with no additional preparation. On a showroom floor, it made no sense whatsoever. It had no creature comforts, no warranty that covered anything resembling street use, and a price tag inflated by the cost of hand-built modifications that Ford could never recover at retail volume. Drivers like Gas Ronda and Butch Leal campaigned these Thunderbolts hard through the 1964 season, and the car dominated its NHRA class. But dominating a drag strip and generating a sale on a dealer lot were two entirely different problems, and Ford only solved the first one. Number 6. The 1970 Ford Boss 429 Mustang exists because NASCAR required Ford to install its new 429 cubic inch semi-Hemi engine in a production car before the engine could compete on the superspeedways. Ford's problem was that the 429 was enormous. It was too wide to fit in the engine bay of the Torino, which was the car Ford actually wanted to race. The solution was to shoehorn it into the Mustang, a car whose engine compartment was never designed to hold anything that large. Ford contracted the job to CarCraft, a specialty shop in Brighton, Michigan that handled much of Ford's racing fabrication. CarCraft widened the Mustang's shock towers, relocated the battery to the trunk, rerouted the brake lines, and modified the suspension geometry to accommodate the massive engine. The result was a Mustang that looked aggressive on the outside but carried a powertrain that fought the chassis at every turn. The 429 was a high RPM NASCAR engine tuned for sustained speed on banked ovals. On the street, it felt sluggish below 4,000 revolutions. The car was nose-heavy, and the modified front end made routine service difficult for any dealer mechanic who had not been trained on the specific conversion. Ford rated the engine at 375 horsepower, a number that most enthusiasts believe was deliberately understated to keep insurance premiums manageable. But even the official number did not translate into the kind of stoplight performance that a showroom customer expected from a car with the word "boss" on the fender. A buyer who walked into a Ford dealership looking for a fast Mustang in 1970 could get a Mach 1 for considerably less money, with better street manners and a service department that knew how to work on it. The Boss 429 cost a premium that only made sense if you understood what the engine was built to do, and most walk-in customers did not. Ford built roughly 1,400 across the 1969 and 1970 model years, with 859 produced in 1969 and 499 in 1970. Many sat on dealer lots for months. Some were quietly fitted with different carburetors or intake manifolds by dealers trying to make them more drivable for retail buyers who had no intention of entering a race. The car that was built to satisfy a racing rule book satisfied almost nobody who tried to buy one off a showroom floor. Number 5. The 1963 Pontiac Catalina Super Duty 421 was General Motors' most blatant violation of its own promise to stay out of racing. In 1957, the Automobile Manufacturers Association had agreed to withdraw factory support from competitive motorsport. GM's public position was clear. The corporation did not sponsor, support, or encourage racing of any kind. Behind the doors of Pontiac's engineering division, a small group of engineers was building some of the most extreme drag racing hardware ever fitted to a full-size sedan. The Super Duty 421 was a 421 cubic inch V8 with forged internals, radical valve timing, and dual 4-barrel carburetors on a special intake manifold. It produced somewhere north of 400 horsepower in a car that had been stripped of everything the rules and the engineers could justify removing. The hood, fenders, and front bumper were replaced with aluminum panels. The heater was deleted. Sound deadening was removed. The interior was reduced to the bare minimum required for the car to carry a vehicle identification number. Pontiac built fewer than 300 Super Duty cars across the 1962 and early 1963 model years, spread across Catalinas and Grand Prix bodies. They were not advertised. They were not promoted. They were distributed through a quiet network of dealers who had established relationships with competitive drag racers, and most were spoken for before they left the factory. Then, in January 1963, GM's corporate management shut the entire program down. The AMA ban was being enforced from the top, and Pontiac's Super Duty operation was too visible to survive. Cars that were partially assembled on the line were either completed quietly and shipped or broken down for parts. Dealers who had ordered Super Duty Catalinas and had not yet received them were left with unfilled allocations. The handful that reached showroom floors sat next to standard Catalinas that cost far less, rode far better, and did not require race fuel to start in the morning. A Super Duty Catalina in a showroom was a contradiction that no salesman could resolve. It looked like a family car, weighed like a sports car, sounded like a race car, and cost like nothing a family buyer would consider. The ones that survived the cancellation and the racing circuits are now among the most sought-after Pontiacs ever built. Number 4. The 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle COPO 9562. General Motors had an internal policy during the late 1960s that prohibited engines larger than 400 cubic inches in any mid-size car. The rule was supposed to keep GM out of the horsepower war that was attracting congressional scrutiny and insurance industry backlash. It did not work because GM's own dealer ordering system contained a loophole large enough to drive a 427 through. The central office production order system, designed for fleet and specialty vehicles, allowed dealers to request non-standard option combinations that bypass the normal production restrictions. A handful of dealers who understood the COPO pipeline and had relationships with Chevrolet's performance-oriented regional managers began placing orders for Chevelle equipped with the L72 427 cubic inch V8, an iron block engine rated at 425 horsepower that GM officially reserved for the full-size Impala and the Corvette. The 427 was never supposed to fit in the Chevelle's engine bay according to GM's own corporate guidelines, but the COPO system processed the orders because every individual component on the build sheet was a valid production part. Nobody at the corporate level had written a rule preventing a dealer from combining them in a mid-size car. The dealers who ordered COPO 9562 Chevelle knew exactly what they were getting. a mid-size muscle car with a big block engine that Chevrolet's own policy said should not exist. The cars arrived at dealerships with no factory advertising, no brochure, and no official performance specifications. Chevrolet did not promote the COPO Chevelle because promoting it would have meant acknowledging that its own internal displacement policy had been circumvented through its own ordering system. A buyer had to know the car existed before walking into the dealership, because no salesman was going to volunteer that information. The COPO Chevelle was faster than the SS396 in every measurable way and cost considerably more, but it came with no warranty assurance for competition use and no corporate acknowledgement that it was a real production vehicle. Dealers who had ordered them on speculation found that most walk-in customers had never heard of the car and could not understand why a Chevelle with no special badging cost as much as it did. The COPO 9562 proved that the fastest way around a corporate ban was not to fight the policy, but to find the ordering system that the policy had forgotten to close. Number 3. The 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona was the original winged warrior, the car that started the entire Aero war before Plymouth ever bolted a wing onto a Superbird. The Daytona began life as a standard 1969 Charger RT, then received an 18-inch aerodynamic nose cone fabricated from sheet metal and a rear wing mounted on tall steel struts bolted to the trunk lid. The engineering goal was specific: break the 200 miles per hour barrier on a NASCAR superspeedway, something no stock-bodied car had ever accomplished. On March 24, 1970, Buddy Baker drove a Charger Daytona past that mark at Talladega Superspeedway, making it the first car with a production-based body to officially reach that speed on a closed course. Dodge needed to produce 500 examples to homologate the Daytona for NASCAR competition. They built 503 and sent them to dealers, where nearly every one of them was met with the same reaction: confusion. The nose cone extended so far forward that the car would not fit in a standard service bay at some dealerships. The rear wing stood high enough to make parking in a residential garage a legitimate concern. Customers who wandered onto the lot and saw a Daytona sitting between ordinary darts and coronets had no frame of reference for what they were looking at. Dodge offered the car with a 440 cubic inch V8 as standard, and a small number received the 426 Hemi. Neither engine option made the Daytona any easier to explain to someone who had walked in looking for a regular Charger. Some dealers removed the nose cones and rear wings entirely, converting the Daytona back into what appeared to be a standard Charger just to move the inventory. Others parked the winged cars behind the building and waited for months before selling them at heavy discounts. NASCAR eventually changed its displacement rules specifically to ban the winged cars from competition, making the entire homologation exercise irrelevant for future seasons. The car that broke 200 miles per hour on a racetrack could not break free of its own dealer lot. Number 2. The 1963 Chevrolet Z11 Impala was General Motors' best-kept open secret. Publicly, GM was committed to the Automobile Manufacturers Association agreement to stay out of factory-sponsored racing. The corporate line held firm: GM did not race. Behind closed doors, Chevrolet was quietly assembling some of the most extreme drag racing hardware ever to carry a vehicle identification number. The Z11 was a regular production option code that could theoretically be ordered on a full-size Impala through any Chevrolet dealer. In practice, every Z11 allocation was controlled by Chevrolet's Central Performance Group, and each car was directed to a known competitive drag racer or a dealer with a factory-backed racing program. The engine was a 427 cubic inch V8 with dual 4-barrel carburetors on a cross-ram intake manifold, producing well over 400 horsepower. The car was systematically lightened at the factory: aluminum hood and front-end panels, thinner window glass, stripped sound deadening, and the complete deletion of heater and radio. Chevrolet produced approximately 57 Z11 Impalas. They shipped through the normal dealer delivery system, which created a paper trail that made GM's public stance against racing increasingly hard to defend. On the drag strip, the Z11 was devastating. It ran mid-12-second quarter miles at trap speeds that humiliated everything else in its class, including rival factory efforts from Ford and Chrysler. On a showroom floor, it was an anomaly. It looked like a regular Impala from across the parking lot, but carried a sticker price and a hollow, stripped interior that told a completely different story. Most Z11s never spent a single night sitting on a showroom floor. They were spoken for before the cars left the assembly line. The handful that were not went to buyers through racing connections and word of mouth, never through a walk-in customer who happened to point at the one in the window. Number 1. The 1966 Chevrolet Biscayne 427 is the car that proves the entire premise of this list. Chevrolet needed a weapon for the NHRA's super stock drag racing classes, and the formula was simple. Take the lightest, cheapest, most stripped-down full-size body in the lineup, drop in the biggest engine the factory offered, and sell just enough of them to satisfy the sanctioning body. The Biscayne was Chevrolet's base model, the car you bought if you wanted basic transportation and nothing else. It came with rubber floor mats instead of carpet, a bench seat with minimal padding, and the kind of interior trim that told you the accountants had made every decision. Chevrolet fitted it with the 427 cubic inch V8, the same engine block that powered the Corvette and the full-race Z11 program, available in multiple states of tune, including the solid lifter L72, rated at 425 horsepower. The result was a full-size sedan that weighed less than its Impala and Caprice siblings because it carried none of their sound-deadening luxury trim or creature comforts. On the drag strip, the 427 Biscayne was a terror. It looked like the kind of car a government office would use for a motor pool, and it ran quarter-mile times that embarrassed buyers who had spent twice the money on something with chrome and bucket seats. At the dealership, the car made no sense to anyone who was not already planning to race it. A loaded Impala Supersport cost about the same money and gave you a car you could actually enjoy driving to work on Monday morning. The Biscayne 427 gave you rubber mats, a dog-dish hubcap on each corner, and an engine that shook the windows of the service department next door at idle. Salesmen had no pitch for it. The brochure barely acknowledged it existed. The buyers who ordered them knew exactly what they wanted and usually had a set of slicks and a roll bar waiting at home. Every car on this list was built because the racetrack demanded a certain engine in a certain body, and the rules required the manufacturer to pretend it was a car somebody might drive to church on Sunday. The 427 Biscayne is the most honest version of that lie. Chevrolet did not even bother dressing it up. 9 cars, each engineered to solve a racing problem, not a sales problem. Every one of them forced some dealer in some town to stand in a showroom and try to make sense of a machine that was never designed for the person standing on the other side of the counter. The factories moved on. The rule books were rewritten. The homologation minimums that forced these cars into existence were tightened, loosened, and eventually abandoned altogether. Most of these machines disappeared into private collections and climate-controlled garages, valued today at prices that would have baffled the dealers who could not give them away. The cars that could not sell themselves became the cars that collectors fight over. For the full story behind the muscle cars that actually made it to the street, the video on screen is waiting for you. If you made it to the end, hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.